In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, and may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon His last and beloved Messenger Muhammad, and may the peace and blessing of Allah be upon you all. The title of this video is the optimal method to design and to analyze any system or any structure. Now, as an introduction to this episode, if for example we want to find a certain variable like displacement, stresses, temperature, voltage on a structure as the one shown on the screen. So this structure, as you can see, it contains a lot of curves, a lot of curvature, and it has so many parts. So we want to find, for example, the displacement or the stress at point 1 in the structure. So the question how to do that, how to calculate the stress or displacement at that point. Now, because this structure has so many curves, it has a curvature, it's not easy to use direct equations using distinctive materials, like the equation that relates the force, the displacement, like force is equal to stiffness multiplied by displacement. The spring law, for example, it's not easy to use these laws because most of these laws were derived for simple geometrical shapes. They weren't derived for shapes having curvature and many parts. So it is difficult to find and to calculate these variables for complex structures. So the question now arises, what is the best way to calculate these variables for a complex structure? Now, as it's the method in my videos, I always go to the Quran, the last revelation of Allah God to people, to learn from the Quran what I need to know. And keeping in mind that Allah God Almighty stated in the Quran that He did not leave anything out of the book, meaning that the Quran contains all the parts of knowledge. So in this lecture I will show how to learn from the Quran the best way to design and to analyze engineering systems and structures. So let's start. If we ponder upon verse number 21 of chapter 51 of the Quran, which states, "And in your own selves will you not then see?" The verse once again, "And in your own selves will you not then see?" So Allah Almighty urges us to ponder and reflect upon the creation of our body, how He created the human body. Now if we do that, and if we ponder upon how Allah created the thigh bone, it's called the femur. Now if we look at this bone, we see that it has curvature. It's not a simple structure to analyze using the equations we know. Also, we know that there are cells called osteocytes, and as you can see on the screen, these cells are found throughout the bone, throughout the skeletal system, in the bone tissue. Now these cells, they can sense the displacement around them. So these osteocytes, they can sense the displacement anywhere in the bone tissue. So if we ponder upon this, as Allah urges us to ponder how He created our bodies, so Allah, God Almighty, gave these cells a mechanism on how to sense displacements on any location in the structure. And if you think about what we want, what we desire a method to calculate any variable within a complex structure. So in the body, these cells, they can sense displacements at any location in the bone tissue in these complex structures. So now the next logical step, if we understand the mechanism that Allah Almighty put in the bones and gave these cells to sense these displacements, we can learn the best method to analyze engineering systems and structures. So what is this mechanism? We can learn it also from the Quran. If we ponder upon verse number 8 of chapter 82 of the Quran, which states, "In whatever form Allah willed, He assembled you together." In whatever form Allah willed, He assembled you together. So if we ponder upon this verse, we realize that Allah God Almighty is teaching us that He created our body in a process of assembly. He assembled our body. Now what does this imply? This implies that your body is made by small basic units linked together to produce the final product. Again, the process of assembly dictates that you have small parts assembled together to create the final product. So if you look at the bone, the basic building units of bone tissue, we can see it on the screen. It's called hydroxyapatite crystals, and this is a computer model for one of these crystals I made. And these crystals, Allah Almighty assembles them together, as you can see on the screen, to create this beautiful hexagonal design. And a multitude of these hexagonal cells produces the bone, the final product. So this means that if you take a cross section in your thigh bone, your femur for example, and you magnify it billions of times, you will see this hexagonal cells, like cells, hexagonal beehive. So we understand now that the mechanism, Allah is teaching us how to analyze and design complex structures, that we simplify the complex structure by dividing it to small, simply shaped units, and these units are assembled together to produce the final product. So once again, the mechanism or the way that Allah is teaching us to analyze any system, to divide the system into small units. And these units, there is a certain condition on these units that should be simple to analyze and simple to derive equations for. And these units are assembled together to produce a final output. So it's a method of discretization, simplifying the complex structure by dividing it into smaller units. And also Allah gives us a complete kind of understanding for this method, where Allah states in the Quran that He covered the bones with flesh, that after He created the bones, He covered them with flesh. So as you can see on the screen, we can think about the skeletal system as the framework of the body. Then Allah covers this framework with flesh, and part of the flesh is the muscles. And we know that muscles, they produce force. So after building the structure, we apply the forces and the boundary conditions to it. This method of simplifying a complex structure by dividing it into smaller units and then applying boundary conditions, people, they discovered this method after hundreds of years of thinking and trial and error approach. They call this method nowadays finite element analysis, or the finite element method. So what Allah teaches us in the Quran in a matter of seconds, people took tens of years and hundreds of years to develop the basis of this method. So we see that Allah Almighty wants the believer to be the teacher of others and not the one on the receiving end. But we see because so many Muslims, they deserted the Quran, they find themselves on the receiving end of matters and in a humiliated state. So to know more details about this method and how to apply it, please visit my website at www.quran-miracle.com, and you can email me at zaidquran@yahoo.com, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all.